And a very good morning to you. We're live in London. You're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up today, my guests, David Schlesinger and Tessa Szyszkowitz, will share their views on the week's biggest stories. Tessa, what have you spotted?
Well, I was quite interested in seeing that how Barron Trump, the youngest of the Trump children, has helped his father in the campaign.
OK, thank you very much indeed for that. And David, what's caught your eye?
My favorite story is that an AI robot has done a portrait of Alan Turing, the man who in the 1950s invented the test for AI, and it sold for over $1 million at auction.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. We'll also head to New Delhi for the latest news from there.
I'm Lyndee Prickitt in New Delhi, and I'll be talking about India's pollution problem that's getting so bad even Pakistan is complaining, the India-Canada diplomatic row that's heightening, and the case of the chief minister's missing samosa.
Plus, Monocle's editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, will join us live from Sydney. It's the 10th of November 2024, live from London. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very good morning to you and a very warm welcome to David Schlesinger, independent advisor and commentator on media journalism and China, and Tessa Szyszkowitz, UK correspondent for the Austrian weekly magazine Falter. Good morning. How's your week been, Tessa? You've had a busy one.
Well, we were all quite busy and sort of out of our comfort zone, let's put it like this, with the political events of this week.
It was pretty exhausting when you suddenly realise that the next 4 years' headlines are going to have the 5-letter word TRUMP in it. David, how about you? How has your week been?
Well, I think I've been trying to find the light side of life rather than dwelling on the darkness that could come. I've tried to find the fun part. For example, Chinese stocks that either rose or fell because their names sounded like Trump or Harris. These are stories that have amused me and kept me going through the week.
Wonderful. The things that sustain in interesting times. Let's head to the other side of the world now. Our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, is standing by in Sydney. I've never done this before. Good day, Tyler.
Good morning, Emma. Greetings from Double Bay in Sydney, where I'm just standing outside the fantastic Margaret restaurant, one of Mr. Perry's new outlets, which is very, very exceptional, I have to say. I've stepped away from a table to just check in and say a very lovely good morning to all of our listeners around the world.
We won't keep you too long from your dinner. So first and foremost, what have you ordered?
Well, we just had some really fantastic, some fantastic prawns from the very far, far north, some island, I think not far from Darwin, I was told, which were amazing. And I think there's something of an Aussie Wagyu beef moment, I think, which is probably about to arrive. Not too far out, but it's amazing just to be back in Australia. It's been, I think, an absence of about 7 years since we've been down here, and really just amazing to be back in the country after all this time. And of course, a huge market for us. This is a market, lots of radio listeners for Monocle, but also, when it comes to actually, just the pure number of readers, both subscribers, but also newsstand, it's our third biggest market in the world.
That's lovely and reassuring to hear. So, in the 7-year gap, just from where you're standing, how has Australia changed?
It's amazing. I think on one side, this is it's been a bit of a conversation that this was a country which was of course closed, shuttered. You had the state of Victoria, which I think had one of the longest lockdowns in the world. So you have a country which is I feel is sort of in this moment of having to remarket itself, having to remind people that it's here, because all of those people who love to go and rent a house in Whale Beach or wherever they wanted to go, all of those habits that people had for a very long time, of course, those were broken, and people look elsewhere. They end up in Thailand, they go to Mexico, they went somewhere else. So I think there is a bit of an Australian reawakening that needs to, or that is happening. And I think there's a feeling of, where is the world? And of course it is, and people feeling a little bit sad about the fact that they have been forgotten, because yeah, there's the other side of it, because the country is so remote. It's so self-sufficient in so many ways that it can kind of get on with it. They don't really need your olive oil. They're making their own. They've got plenty of wine. They've got everything. They've got everything they need. But of course, at the same time, you also feel this is a country which is maybe a little bit starved for inspiration, for information, for that exchange that happens when people get off planes. It's not just about going on screens and looking at great architecture and design, but also those amazing things that happen when you encounter people from other parts of the world and you do it across a dinner table.
And what's the media landscape there as well? I mean, you're talking about the fact that we have a healthy number of people who are connected to Monocle. And if you're listening in Australia this evening, welcome and enjoy your dinner. But in terms of the way that the landscape is set at the moment, how healthy is the Australian media landscape?
Well, I think one of the slightly terrifying things is just the evaporation of the good old Australian news agency. And when I say news agency, I don't mean a wire service. I'm talking about what would be the local kiosk or the news, literally the news agent, the news stand. I don't know where they all went, but they're gone. I don't know where our readers find magazines, and there's still a healthy number of people who buy magazines at a news agency, but they are gone, or the ones that are around have a sliver of a selection of titles. You can, yes, I did find Monocle. You can find The Economist. You can find The New Yorker. But try to find, if you're interested, a copy of Italian Vogue. Try to find a copy of French Harper's Bazaar. Good luck. That sense of the international dynamic newsstand, that is long gone. There may be one or two specialists, but that is really not happening. So when we're talking about pure print, but this is still the land of the big, proper broadsheet. It was amazing being on the plane this morning, reading The Australian giving an absolute thumping to the ABC today, which they were just saying was too much of a state mouthpiece. Just too much. And I guess they were taking really issue with the fact, of course, yes, this is a Murdoch newspaper, but saying that the ABC lost all objectivity when it came to the election, that they were firmly in the Harris camp, and basically saying, how can you be flying journalists all over the world at the expense of the Australian taxpayer? And having them not do their job of being unbiased and delivering the coverage that they should have been delivering, and looking rather ridiculous come later in the week.
I don't think it'll be the only news outlet in the world which is looking at itself and examining why it chose the path it took. Let's talk a little bit more about Australian culture and the fact that you're coming into summer now. You should be sort of near late spring now. The Australians embrace that cafe life really, really stylishly, don't they?
They do, and that's one of the things when you run around, you think, could you reinvent the stackable table or chair yet again? And they managed to do so. Could you rethink how you can wedge in a Marzocco machine and four small tables? And as I said, I'm standing in Double Bay. Actually, an area, of course, people used to call it Double Pay. It was one of the original sort of zones of luxury goods in Sydney. Probably one of the first places that a lot of major European brands, when they wanted to put out their own sign, that they came to this part of Sydney. And then it went through a bit of a rough patch where it wasn't so exciting. And again, total reinvention. Streets are buzzing, fantastic new restaurants, and a really, an interest, I would say a great energy. It's just one thing. It's going back to also an interesting conversation as well. What you notice is this country's, really being in lockstep because of AUKUS, because of course, its situation in this part of the world, the neighborhood watch game it needs to play with the U.S., obviously with the U.K. as well, is a very, very interesting one. So there's a lot of conversation about now what happens, of course, new relationship with Washington, between Washington and Canberra, what that's going to mean. But then also just going back to what will this mean in terms of also maybe an opening up as well. The fact that, yes, okay, Qantas can get you back and forth across the Pacific, but also because of this relationship, do we also see, just more flights, more marketing of Australia and the U.S. And again, sort of maybe a little bit of a love affair, which, yes, you could say in geopolitical terms was there, but maybe in terms of actually getting people to experience, the great cities, all this country has to offer, does that get a bit of a reset now as well?
There's an interesting element to this, and you sort of teed me up for this in communications before the programme started, which is obviously if you're getting on an aeroplane and it's long haul, your choice of clothing can often be more comfort rather than style. Is that something that's spilled over to the streets of Sydney?
Well, spillover is the operative word. I was out on a very long walk today, and you go by, of course, and it's Sunday morning, and it's like Sunday morning in many parts of the world. But my goodness, you'd want to have shares in DuPont, or anyone else who is in the business of stretchy fibers, because I have never seen more people in athleisure from head to toe all day long. It's quite. I thought, okay, this is the preserve of people in Pacific Palisades, but no, it is everywhere. Men, women.
What are they wearing, Tyler?
Toddlers.
What's hot on this? What's hot in athleisure?
I would say sort of a cocoa legging with a big tummy band. We talk about spilling over, keeping everything in place.
Excellent. Will you be bringing back some for London?
I listen. I don't think you need. I mean, unless they're reducing the size of Studio One, maybe you need them in Studio 2 if you're there today. Sort of the audio version of Spanx. I don't know.
Oh my God, Tyler, get back to your dinner. She'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much for joining us on the line from Sydney. Discreetly, a jumper was raised very gently by Tessa Szyszkowitz there. Are you okay?
Revealing.
Are you wearing athleisure?
I do, and
right.
especially on Sunday morning.
Have you got a cocoa band and some Spanx on?
I have all sorts of things on which I don't want to tell the details to our listeners, but I think casual, comfortable wear, especially for women, is one of the big successes of the beginning 21st century.
Can I just go on the record to say that I own no tracksuits at all?
Is this good or bad? Shall I help you?
I'm just going on the record to say it. I'm not making a value judgment. I just own none. I would not feel comfortable in them.
But they're very comfortable.
They are.
They may be comfortable physically, but not psychically for me.
Oh, we're going into a complicated place with David. What is the... Okay... Obviously, I don't want to open a Pandora's box of trauma, but is there anything sort of... What's the psychical difference of the pair of comfortable trousers?
Comfort is fine, but I think you need to you need to know the difference between inside and outside. You need to know the difference between sport and non-sport. Things have their place.
Okay.
Or maybe that's the German in me. I don't know.
So would you not be averse to a... Well, why are we talking about this today? You would not be adverse to perhaps a pair of sort of comfortable tracksuit bottoms, leggings, a little like what Tessa is wearing today, indoors. As the inside-outside, because I know that the Japanese, and your wife is Japanese, isn't she?
No, she's Chinese.
She's Chinese. Oh, my apologies.
Chinese, yes.
But there is that idea that comfortable clothing inside the house is actually something to be celebrated by some.
Yes. I might wear a tracksuit in the gym. I don't think I'd wear it in the house.
All right, fine. So, Tessa, all eyes on you now.
Yeah, I mean, I find it really interesting how clothing has changed in the last years. You don't have to suffer anymore, and you still look very good because these, modern leisure wear companies just produce very elegant and well wearable clothes, and I'm very happy about this, I have to say.
We have to stress that what you're wearing today is not a cocoa legging with some Spanx. It is actually... I'm just going to get you to talk us through it, because when I saw you this morning, I would not have classified you as wearing athleisure at all. I would have thought she's wearing a pair of very comfortable navy trousers with piping down the side.
That is correct. We don't want to go into any sort of mentioning of where I got this, but actually really close by on Marylebone High Street. And as your listeners maybe know, usually it is quite chilly in the Monocle Radio studios. And so you have to wear a little, outfit that makes you feel comfortable and warm. And that's what I did this morning.
You've got a very, very good point here in terms of the fact that when you're sitting around a radio microphone for an hour, this is boring to anybody who doesn't have to do this, but you have to be comfortable because things can dig in. And if things dig in, you can't breathe. It's really simple. As I am learning from the pair of jeans that I'm wearing, that's far too tight. But Tessa's come in and she's got the most elegant hood. Right, okay, so when I was
she is elegant.
She's so elegant.
You have to start with the person, isn't it? She is elegant, so it really doesn't matter what she wears.
I really like how this is going.
This is so good. This is Tessa.
We need a video feed, please.
Never. But the idea is Tessa's wearing the most delightful navy blue cashmere hooded sweater, and somehow athleisure has suddenly become just rather discreet and lovely.
The thing to do.
So we need to send you to Sydney, basically, to help them all out. But
I
yes,
can do that.
The most comfortable way of dressing. Okay, we've spent 15 minutes talking about tracksuits. Let's talk about, which frankly, does anybody find themselves hearing the word Trump? And I think I mentioned this last week on Monocle on Sunday, that you just, your stress levels are immediately raised, not because of the fact of what he's going to do, but the level of surprise that is going to be brought to the world for the next 4 years. Good or bad, whatever he will do will all totally flummox us because we don't know what he's got up his sleeve. And this time he's got the people to help him.
I think that's exactly right. I think what's so triggering for me is the chaos element of it. The fact that we can sit here and we probably will sit here and speculate about various things, what it means for China, what it means for Europe, what it means for whatever. But we don't know because a lot depends on what happens when he wakes up in the morning, what deal he thinks he can make, if he's bored, if he's not bored. And that I find very difficult to take in a leader.
It is incredibly difficult, but I wonder whether we are all going to have to recalibrate the approach that we take to him this time around. Tessa, I think I read somewhere that someone said that the last time around we didn't take him seriously, but we took him literally, and as a result we just responded to absolutely everything that he did. This time around we don't take him literally because that will just exhaust the world, but we really do need to take him seriously.
Yeah, I think there was an essay yesterday in the FT Weekend of Francis Fukuyama, who also says, to just pretend not to take him literally and to think that he will do what he announces would be a mistake. And I think what he announced before coming to power now is quite scary. And also, it's not that it will work, but it might have terrible, dreadful consequences to the world order as we know it. And one thing in one of my interviews this week, in the reaction to European voices, I interviewed Timothy Garton Ash, and he said to me, we do have a Trump party now in Europe, meaning that there is a block of political forces from Viktor Orban to Marine Le Pen, but of course also in Austria, for example, the FPÖ, the far right, is the strongest party since the last elections, not in government yet. But all these people feel strengthened by Trump just having made such a success of all this political content, which is hair-raising for liberals and for European liberals especially, and progressive everywhere. But it's something where we have to really deal with the fact that our environment, our political environment is changing.
Tell us a little bit more about how the political environment in Europe you see changing, because just looking at the French media this week, it was quite interesting to see that. I think a headline in Le Monde suggested that campaigners for Marine Le Pen's party had been told not to mention Trump because he was too complicated and dangerous a figure. And I mean, looking at Politico this morning, it's saying that in 2016, the French far-right standard-bearer Marine Le Pen rushed to congratulate Trump for his election before the race was even called. This time, she waited for Emmanuel Macron to go first. Yes, indeed, the guy in the White House is more aligned with the Orbans and the Le Pens of this world. But it's not so straightforward, is it? Because it's phenomenally complicated.
It is really complicated. I think Marine Le Pen is an interesting case because she still has to get into power. So her way in the last month was to try not to be as radical as people perceive her to be. So, for example, she voted against the AfD in the European Parliament to join this particular group of far-right parties because she didn't want to be aligned with a German far-right politician at the time who was sort of making light of Nazi soldiers and generals. And so we have a group of these far-right parties that want to be careful and gain ground in the middle in order to be elected, in her case, president, and enter the Élysée. We have a problem also in France, of course, and in Germany at the moment, that the ruling governments are very, very weak. So due to the hubris of Macron and due to the coalition that failed in Berlin under the Social Democrats, because the Liberals were sort of not able to help with a coalition agreement on a budget for 2025. So now we have two of the main European nations with still, moderates and Christian democratic or sort of left or right of center governing parties, and in Germany the Social Democrats. But we have not a strong center, which means it's even easier for the far-right parties to gain ground in the middle. And that's one of the most important lessons, I think, also from the elections in the United States, that a lot of the voters who voted for Trump are not far-right crazy people. The people I met on my research in Pennsylvania 3 weeks ago were a lot of, people who just said, this government has made it more complicated to shop in the supermarket, even if it's not the fault of the Democrats. But if you've been in power for 4 years throughout huge crises like the pandemic and also the war in the Ukraine, which was not the fault of Joe Biden. But, of course, the people just wanted to get them out of office and try something new who promises to bring down the prices. So I think we have to see that throughout all the crises that we feel everywhere now make it easier for far-right populists to sort of promise a new beginning, and people go for it. How long they then stay in power, of course, is another matter.
And it's also arguably naive to think that political alliances can be built with Donald Trump. I mean, David, the thing that Donald Trump says from day one is make America great again. He will put America's interests first.
Absolutely. And I think this is one reason why the European far-right parties have to be very careful, because a lot of the Trump policies could make life very difficult for Europe. And no one wants to have to defend their friend who is actually making life in Europe intolerable. I think for Trump, you have to be his friend. You have to be a strongman. So the strongmen of the world will be happy and will probably have a better ride of it. But Trump is always looking for the immediate short-term deal. What's going to be good for me now?
And those beautiful tariffs.
And those scary tariffs, because that could really sink the world economy. Why the stock market is going up at the moment, I'm not sure. Perhaps people think he won't go through with it. Perhaps they realize that he's all about self-interest in the end, and when his own fortune is threatened by a collapse of the world economy, he'll back off the things that are most difficult and threatening. But if you listen to the words, they're quite frightening words.
And what you say is, will he back off? Everything that is being mentioned this week suggests that Donald Trump has to go through whatever he pledged to do, because clearly this is something that he wants to do, and it is all about personal will. I mean, just looking at the New York Times this morning talks about the headline here is Trump has made his view clear of migrants. Will it stop them from coming? Already, even without anything being placed into law or any policy being formed, we have people living in the United States or thinking about going to live in the United States having second thoughts already. So it's an interesting thing that, whatever he suggested he might do may indeed come to pass anyway.
But it's so difficult. This issue of non-legal migrants living for years and years and in second generation, where the children are U.S. citizens, to get all these people, pack them up, and it's just a populist promise that nobody has ever been able to fulfill. It's Joe Biden tried to organize it a little bit better in his administration to have ease legal immigration, and that again now has also led to a backlash, because obviously a lot even of the migrant vote was against even the legal migration, let alone irregular migration. But what we will see in the next month is either he invests a lot of money into building up, detention centers and legal personnel to deal with all these requests to just throw out people en masse from the United States. I mean, this is something that needs a lot of organization. I'm not sure that Donald Trump has the skills to organize a mass expulsion of illegal migrants. And also there will be a backlash within the population because of a lot of these people are very, very necessary for the U.S. economy to do the jobs that other people don't want to do.
But I think we just have to remember that Trump is, at the end of the day, an entertainer. He built casinos. He built flashy buildings. He was on television. He is an entertainer. So he will do something that is very visible. He will probably have a few lightning raids, a few airplane rides of people crying, wailing, pushed out of the country, and then he'll lose interest. The same thing with his wall. He built a few sections of wall to show.
Completely useless.
And completely useless. But he did have his show. So what I think will happen is that we'll have a show and maybe a continuing show over 4 years of raids, of very visible expulsions. But it's not going to be organized. It's not going to be millions. It'll be probably violent, ugly, cruel, visible, but not effective.
Headline grabbing, at least.
Headline grabbing.
Tessa, when you were in Pennsylvania, how much was migration an issue for voters?
Oh, very much so. I mean, you see, I went to Allentown, for example, which was a white working class town until the 80s when the factories closed, famously sung by Billy Joel in his song. And now, since 2020, for the first time, the majority are Latino voters who came filling the, depressed town now with new life. It's actually a very good thing. And they make do with what they have there, and they're quite positive. But for them, the issue is don't bring more people in that, again, might take our jobs away. And so this is this cycle that we have not only in America, but everywhere.
And I mean, we had a big meeting of European leaders this week discussing Russia and Ukraine. And the point was raised that woe betide or beware Europe, because the two things that got Trump into power were the economy and migration. And I mean, we saw a little bit from the European parliamentary elections in June where the far right did terribly well. But is there a moment now within Europe, and within when you're talking to people in Austria and you're talking to your news editors, are they suddenly waking up to the fact that this is two issues which really need to be addressed seriously?
Yeah, but it's not since these elections now in America. I mean, the migration since 2015 has rocked Europe in election results, but also in the debate within the European Union. I think Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, in putting together her Commission now also, and the topics for her next Commission, the next period of the EU institutions, trying to work out how migration can be diffused as a bomb for far-right election results. And so you have, for example, Poland, which has a pro-European liberal government now, which is very important also as one of the big EU states. Donald Tusk has introduced now this idea that he will push back illegal or irregular migrants being pushed over from the Belarusian dictator into Poland as a provocation. So these pushbacks will become much more, how to say, like normalized. Yeah. So we see, and the European Union has to respond to that because it's important to the voters, but it's also important to the balance and the social sort of balance in the European Union.
You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Joining me around the table is Tessa Szyszkowitz and David Schlesinger. Let us head, however, to the other side of the world, where we can go to New Delhi for a look at the latest news there. Lyndee Prickitt is Monocle's correspondent in the region. A very good afternoon to you, Lyndee.
Good, dusty, hazy, smoggy afternoon to you.
Right. How's it looking from where you are then?
Oh, I can see about 20 feet in front of me. No, it's not quite that bad, but it does feel like Armageddon sometimes. November, December, January used to be the best months in Delhi. The temperature would be great. The mosquitoes would be at bay. And now the last 10 years, even longer by some accounts, we have this horrible pollution that has come in and just really ruined the season, not to mention really causing damage and harm to a lot of people. And some of the long-term damage is still being questioned in terms of health. But certainly most of us, it's hard for me right now. I have a tickle in my throat and I'm dying to cough, but I'm trying not to because I have a microphone in my hand and I don't want to disappoint you. But that's the constant thing here. It's like a smoker's cough without the hit of the nicotine.
Without the fun. Well, please do feel free to cough. We don't want you to sort of anything bad to happen to you while you're live on the radio. That was the last thing. So do feel free. It'll sort of make the story, sort of more real for you. What's it like trying to live there? Clearly you're trying to do your job and you can't breathe.
Yeah, as I say, it's sad. We send our kids to school. They're wearing masks. They were wearing masks, of course, before the pandemic. So it is sad. It's easier though, of course, because I'm somebody who can afford not just an AC when it gets hot, but an air purifier in my home. That is not the case for 90% of the people that are, maybe 80%. It's quite a wealthy city in some metrics. But there's so many people who don't have that luxury, and there's so many people who work on the street. And I don't just mean the people who are, coming to your cars and asking for alms, but many of the shops and kiosks in India by nature are these sort of open frontage shops. So they're spending all day in this air, and it really is a tragedy. And I think the reason it is so pernicious, not just from a health aspect, but from a legislative aspect and a solution finding aspect, is it is a multi-headed monster. And fixing one issue, cutting back one problem, it's just not enough. There's, of course, the natural, though less harmful dust from being in a desert terrain. There's cars, of course, though believe it or not, it's the two-wheeler scooters or cheap motorbikes that are the biggest polluters on the road. And being a developing country means development. Concrete mixing, tar laying, marble cutting, construction dust, much of which is hazardous and some even toxic. It's everywhere. And that's not to say anything of the noise pollution or how much of the effluence is going into our water systems. And of course, you've probably heard the big one this time of year. Of course, there's a few days where Diwali fireworks go crazy, although that has definitely decreased over the past few years. But the real big problem is the stubble burning. Farmers clearing their fields for the next season's crop by burning the stubble for miles and miles. And this year it's so bad that even Pakistan has complained, as levels of pollution in Lahore are also awful. And they're saying it's the winds from India that are polluting the skies. And it's hard because this is an area that is a sort of plain. You've got the Himalayas to the north and the Aravallis near us as well. So it means that the bad air often just lingers and takes weeks and weeks and weeks to shift.
And tell us, when you're trying to do business in New Delhi, how much is this putting companies and investors off when they realise that they see the economic and the social potential that India holds and offers, but the minute that they touch down at the airport, they suddenly get a major flash of reality?
Well, there's 1.4 billion people here, and they are tenacious to the core. So while it might put some people off, and there are some people who head back to wherever they might have come from, there are 20,000 people waiting to take that place. So I can't say that it has that kind of effect. Even I last night was in an open air bar, and so were so many other people. So it's not nice to live with, but it's not as if it's creating a massive direct economic cost. However, the cost to the labor force in terms of sickness and illness will be great. And I will say that just from, in a very sort of elite section of society, it has once again, for expats living here, it has become a hardship posting, and not because of tensions with any neighbors, but because of the pollution and the effects on your health for that. So that is an indication. But yeah, business keeps chugging on, development keeps chugging on. We just wonder when the commissions for the air quality management in the national capital region are going to get their act together. The Supreme Court is constantly ticking them off. And in their words, they say you must implement your own orders. Everything is in the air. You're showing action plans and outcomes, but there's no implementation of your orders. But you see, you've got 4 or 5, 6 states that you're trying to get to agree on one piece of legislation. It's really hard to get agreement.
Let's move on to another story which is dominating the international headlines, which is this continued row between India and Canada.
Oh, yes. So you may remember that there were diplomatic tensions sparked last year when Canada accused India of being involved in the assassination of the Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Now, that was followed by what would be very expected, the tit-for-tat chapter, as I call it, with India expelling Canadian diplomats and then Canadian doing the same with Indian diplomats, both sides accusing each other of surveillance as well, or certainly India is accusing Canada of that now. And crucially, allegedly, India is very upset because allegedly the U.S. supplied Canada with intel it needed to firm up this accusation. So it's just become this big mess. And maybe I just need to back up a minute to sort of explain the Khalistan movement. That is a movement of people that want an independent Sikh nation state here in India. But most of the loudest members of the movement are in Canada. So not surprisingly, it's an old bone of contention between the two countries. Canada has a very large Sikh population, and that's a big vote bank. So many people here are thinking and say that Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been unusually soft on people in his own country who are effectively advocating for the dissolve of part of India, one of its biggest allies. This basically came to a recent head. It keeps bubbling up. There's temples that get attacked from time to time as well in Canada. But a few days ago, while in Australia, the Indian Foreign Secretary, S. Jaishankar, condemned all of this, basically saying that he sees that Canada is providing political space to anti-India elements. And Canada, of course, saying it's that, people are free to voice their concerns. Well, he decided to voice his concerns, and it went broadcast by Australia Today, which reportedly, according to Indian authorities, they said was banned in Canada. India's foreign ministry says Canada blocked the social media handles and certain pages of Australia Today in which Jaishankar was ripping into Canada. And it said it was really smacked of hypocrisy towards this freedom of speech that it goes at lengths to espouse when defending the Khalistani separatist movement protesters in its own country.
Just explain a little bit about, on the ground, how much do Indians actually care about this? Because this seems to have been a problem of diplomatic making and governmental making. And I mean, when you look at it from the outside, it does seem just a little bit sort of the wildness of it does actually strike you.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of those instances where the diaspora who left have stronger feelings than those who stayed behind in the country. Many people I interview for various different stories will often say, you guys left. We're the ones here making India into trying to make it into a powerful, prosperous country. You guys left. So who are you to talk about what needs to happen? There aren't many Sikhs that I speak with here who are advocating for a separate homeland. So it's a strange sort of instant. It's not talked about, as you say, on everybody's lips all the time, except there was an instance a few weeks ago when the leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, was visiting over in the United States and Canada and was talking about how badly Sikhs are treated in India. And everybody sort of turned around and was like, What? What is he talking about? So then it percolated back on the radar again. But yes, this is more a high level diplomatic spat that people in the know get very very annoyed about. But I'm not sure it's what the shopkeepers are chatting about.
Well, something that they might be chatting about is the disappearing samosas story. This is about some police officers who may have a few little crumbs on their face after some samosas destined for a rather important person never ended up on the correct plate. Is that correct?
Oh, it is. It is a good one. Yes, the curious case of the chief minister's samosas. So basically, the the minister of an Indian state called Himachal Pradesh, went to inaugurate a cyber wing station of the CID. That's the Criminal Investigation Department. So naturally, the beloved deep-fried samosa snack, along with cake and tea, were ordered. And by the way, not just any samosa from a street-side stall or dabbar, but they supposedly came from a very posh hotel. And the meeting progressed, and tea and cake was supposedly served, but no samosas. So afterwards, the CID boss was apparently very annoyed. As you can imagine, he ordered these for his guest, and embarrassingly, they didn't show up. So he began to ask what happened to the CM samosas. And apparently 5 officers were accused of eating them for themselves because they thought that they were for them. Maybe they thought it was a present or a celebration for the new inauguration wing. Well, irate at this, the boss is said to have launched an official investigation calling the embarrassing missing samosas an anti-government act. 5 political personnel were served with show cause notices to respond to the wrongful act, with a full-on CID probe being launched supposedly. So you can imagine the fun the media and the public have had here with this curious case of the CM samosas. Tongue-in-cheek editorials and memes galore. But in all fairness, the CID director has just come out and said that the whole thing has been blown way out of proportion. They didn't issue any show notices to anyone, but he had just said, find out what happened. Well, I suppose saying such words in a criminal investigation department office can perhaps be interpreted as an investigation. So I guess you got to be careful with what you say. Indeed. Little PS to the story, though. It turns out that the chief minister's snacks might have done him a favor, as apparently he's got health issues. That means he's banned from deep fried foods anyway.
Lyndee Prickitt, thank you so much for joining us on the line from New Delhi. You may cough now and eat a samosa as long as it's yours. Thank you so much for that. You were absolutely hooting at that, both David and Tessa. I mean, I'm not a mad fan of samosas anyway, but frankly, if it were my samosa, I'd be quite protective of it.
Of course, I'm always very protective of my food, if it's samosas or not.
I am as well.
It's absolutely astonishing. Right, you're listening to Monocle Radio. This is Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson, joined around the table by David Schlesinger and Tessa Szyszkowitz. When we were listening to that and poor Lyndee struggling to breathe in her own home, you do sort of, the China does come to mind, doesn't it, David? And you spent a lot of time in China, and you're no stranger to this.
I was a bit triggered by her report, because certainly a dozen years ago, China was equally horrible. And we would check the app for air quality. It was always in the 300, 400, 500 range. You could, I remember days when I was in a meeting room and I couldn't see beyond the windows. And in fact, it's ruined my lungs forever. I never had asthma before, but now I have asthma. And I'm sure it's a result of that time. But China's air is much, much better now. And I think there are lessons for countries like India that it takes really strong government action. It takes will. But China has cleaned itself up amazingly. What do? They move from soft coal to hard coal, so from dirty coal to a much cleaner coal, number one. And number two, and now we loop right back, I suppose, to the U.S. election. The Chinese electric vehicle industry is huge, and just about every car used to be a polluting gas or diesel engine car or truck, and now you have electric vehicles everywhere, and it's made an amazing difference. So that requires two things, doesn't it? It requires political decisiveness and leadership, but it also requires the private sector, or those who are, whose livelihoods are dependent on getting stuff made, to actually adopt much cleaner practices. So how did the Chinese approach it? Well, China has a bit of we can call it a strong government. And I think once the government decides policy, people fall into line. And democracy is great, but democracy isn't wonderful for getting stuff done. But China saw a crisis, and it took action, and people really fell into line. And a certain amount of decisiveness can be used for the good.
there's also, how much does the reputational issue get raised here, given the fact that for so long China, being seen as one of the world's great polluters, always tiptoeing around COP, and COP, the world leaders are heading there this week, and China is now picking a fight with Europe, saying that trade restrictions should be part of the talks in order to make sure that everything is mitigated. And they're only sending the deputy premier. Xi Jinping is not going on. So there was always a question asked about how seriously China took pollution. Why did it decide to clean its act up?
China, we think about China as a communist country or a socialist country, but in fact, it's probably the most capitalist country that there is. And China saw a business opportunity. China is a leader in battery technology for electric vehicles. It is a leader for solar technology. Chinese companies saw huge opportunities in being green, and they jumped on it, and it's been successful.
Let's circle back around to Trump then. 60% tariffs. I mean, what's been the reaction in China to this?
Well, the government has been cautious and has spoken about the need for cooperation and that we need to have a win-win relationship and that we shouldn't be harming each other, which is, I suppose, you'd expect. Interestingly, the popular reaction seems to have unleashed the Chinese nationalists and the Chinese what would you call them? This is the sort of male bros who are crowing at the idea that feminism lost and that maybe this is a chance to finally put LGBTQ stuff to bed. In fact, a lot of social media was they talked about, what do they call it? They called Trump Deng Wang, so the king who knows everything, and they called Harris Ha Ha Jie, which is basically the laughing sister. So you can just see that there's this contempt for Harris because they sort of adopted the Trump idea that here's this lightweight woman, whereas Trump, because he says he knows everything, he probably does know everything.
And when you were travelling in Pennsylvania and indeed looking towards Europe, how much was that an issue? I mean, the Chinese obviously adopting their own, nicknames for Trump and for Harris, but the idea is there does seem to be, or does there seem to be a major sticking point when it comes to having a woman in the White House?
Well, we see a world where people are not ready to vote for a woman to go into the White House in America, and I think you have this feeling, Emma, we've been in this world now for a bit, and we have fought for our place in front of microphones, but you have a very strong misogynist atmosphere now, especially in all of our countries, where women are not being taken seriously again, or still not. And I think this played a role in these elections very strongly. You see that in the analysis of the voting groups, that a lot of the young men have not voted for Kamala Harris, although black young men would have had a reason to vote for a woman who might be more sensitive also to their concerns as people of color. But people believed more the orange hair old white man, and that's where he is now.
And in Europe as well, is there a risk that might go back? We might go backwards again.
We did have certain things happened here. For example, in the UK, you had 3 prime ministers that were female. You also had, with Rishi Sunak now, a person of color as a prime minister, and it wasn't a big deal. You had Angela Merkel in Germany for a long time being quite admired. Only recently has this reputation started to look a little bit more damaged. You have now Ursula von der Leyen, who is really the voice of reason in Brussels, trying to keep all these crazy men and women together. So it's quite interesting. I think we will see a backlash always when we have progress, and I think we're a little bit in a backlash stream now.
And it depends as well as to how on the very, very surface of this, the optics are in terms of the way that Trump is seen, because it is known that he does not like Ursula von der Leyen. They are not bedfellows, and so she will have to play it very, very carefully in terms of how the European Commission deals with it. But also, if we just cast our minds back to when Trump was in office and Theresa May was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, she had gone over to Washington to make sure that I think apparently there was an insistence that they were going to have tea together, and it looked a bit casual. And so the British insisted that the meeting was held in front of flags in a more formal situation, just to sort of beef up a role. But of course, the great thing that everybody remembers is when Trump takes her hand, and that becomes the lasting image of what people then interpreted as Trump's reaction and Trump's treatment of women leaders.
Yeah. In general, I think he's not a big fan of powerful women. That's why he also groups around him either women who are very sort of beautiful but don't have a lot of sort of input, or like he chose his chief of staff now with Susie Weeks. She's a very good organizer, I think, and she will sort of she's the gatekeeper. And but does she steal his limelight? No.
I do have a theory, though. I don't know if you agree or not, but I think it's no accident that the three British female prime ministers have all been from the Tory party and not from Labour. I would guess that in America, if we ever have a woman president, she will be from the Republicans, because I think there's something about women plus left that people read as extreme left and extreme soft, whereas woman plus right can at least pass as a strong figure.
Well, it's so sad. I mean, I saw this picture of Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton, which was going around on social media, waiting before they were on stage, and before they heard the bad news and never went on stage actually. And it was so sad because you could see that these are not women who are extreme left, blah blah. They are sort of, for European considerations, we would think they are sort of right of center or something, how they think about law and order and how they think about, gender issues. And Kamala Harris was so easily put in this corner of being a communist and a wokeist by Trump. And people just have ran after this on these crazy social media sites that actually Barron found out for his father are the best way of getting into the young, angry man vote. And it worked. And it's terrible because it's a misogynist, sad place to be in.
Tell us that story, because it was the fact that many are suggesting that now 6'7" Barron Trump,
he's really tall.
He's really tall. Was instrumental in engineering a victorious campaign for Trump.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how serious his input was. I mean, I think the Times yesterday ran a story on Barron influencing his father. But what is certainly true is that we, in our mainstream media observations, don't realize how much of it has gone to different sides. So you have media personalities or influencers who are in their 20s and are extremely successful and have millions of clicks and come often out of the gaming world. And that's my suspicion is that Barron Trump in his years as a young teenager in the White House might have spent a considerable amount of time on these gaming websites. But, for example, Trump sat down for interviews in the last month, which I couldn't even understand at the beginning what this was. Logan Paul, for example, who has a huge following. And that was
very good at marketing drinks.
Yes, exactly. And they were talking about sort of crazy thing like alien life forms, and everyone sort of nodded, and millions of people watched these things. And then what Barron told his dad is to follow someone like Aiden Ross. So that's a young man who comes from the gaming world. And then Trump sat down also for a podcast, a long thing with him, where they talked about the drug-addicted, crime-infested nations and were joking about Kamala Harris as if that was a joke to joke about the Vice President of the United States. And this is a secret sort of swamp of opinions that are misogynist in its highest form.
But we also saw the picture coming out of the Trump night was of him leaning across a dinner table talking to Elon Musk. So we now have social media absolutely in the heart of the White House.
Yeah, I mean, when Musk bought Twitter, I must admit that I thought it was a stupid decision, but it turned out to have been brilliant. And whether he must have had a plan from the beginning that this is how you influence opinion, this is how you actually get a seat at the table.
Tell us another story. Let's move away from Trump finally for the last few minutes. You, at the beginning of this program, you wanted to talk about Alan Turing. Yeah, so Alan Turing was, of course, one of the famous British mathematicians in 1950, not only in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and not only did he help crack the German codes during World War II, but he invented the Turing test, which was a test in 1950. He imagined this would be how you would finally understand whether artificial intelligence was good or not. And that was a test where would a scientist be able to tell that a computer had written a dialogue when the scientist was in dialogue with it. So the Turing test was very famous in mathematics and computer science for decades. Well, this year, an artificial intelligence robot that paints had the idea to paint a portrait of Alan Turing. So this artificial intelligence robot came up with the idea to paint this portrait. It painted it. It went to auction and it sold for over $1 million. So it really raises the question, what is creativity? What is art? And what is our future here in this studio? Okay, we've got 2 minutes to address all those. So where do you want to start, David? Well, I think probably a program like this would be okay. But news reading probably won't be okay. It'd be very easy to ask artificial intelligence to pick the top 6 stories of the day and then to voice it in a way that sounds very, very natural. You could do that now, this year, and by next year or the year after, it'll be even more natural, and it could probably do it in 15 languages simultaneously. So I think newsreaders are in trouble. Indeed. I mean, journalism, I do know one person who actually uses ChatGPT to write their articles for them, and you just think,
We want the name.
Never going to win. Never, never. That is, I'd take that to the grave. But that idea that there's a sort of ease now with which that people use AI as its source for creativity. I wonder whether you have to have the idea first. And clearly this has not happened. But this idea that we could just lay back and allow AI just to do the heavy work for us.
Well, I think the limits, of course, are now becoming unclear. And I think our work, we use, for every research we do, we use AI. We just usually don't have ChatGPT writing the articles then afterwards. But in terms of art, it's of course really interesting what is an original or not, because a lot of human artists are using AI too for video installations. And then it's very unclear where creativity is still a unique selling point of humans. And I think we'll see a lot more of this development in the next years.
And I mean, how concerned are you that one day you're going to turn up, Tessa, to the office and they're going to say, sorry?
I mean, we maybe still sort of, have a few years left in the classic media business, but I'm a bit worried that the next generation has a completely different story. And I have to say that after this program, I'm going to an exhibition of Francis Bacon, which is sort of a painter, a human painter without AI. And he is famous because of the expression in his art. And I hope that this kind of human presence, that's also the name of the exhibition, will stay with us.
David Schlesinger, Tessa Szyszkowitz, thank you both so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. A big thanks to all my guests today, as well as David and Tessa, Lyndee Prickitt and our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. The programme was produced by Mariella Bevan. Warm thanks to our studio manager, David Stevens. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday returns next week. But until then, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Enjoy your weekend.